On August 9th, U.S. President Joe Biden signed the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022 into law. It has been seen as the nation's boldest industrial legislation in decades. So what is boldness really about? Can it lower the cost of goods in America? And what impact will it have on the semiconductor industry and our future? Well, let's take a closer look on this. I'm Sina. Welcome to Foxtel. So why did the US rush forward with this CHIPS bill? Recently, the inflation problem has been quite troubling for Americans. The reasons for the record high CPI involve many aspects, which I explained in detail in our previous episode. The supply chain has been crippled by COVID-19 pandemic, the Russia-Ukraine conflict and related oil shortages, a long period of excessive fiscal and monetary policy, the astronomical $1.5 trillion spending bill, inadequate domestic manufacturing capacity, and high tariffs. All of these factors have contributed to high prices in the US. And to some extent, America is losing its leading position in chip manufacturing. So whether the chip industrial issues or the thorny inflation problem, the White House needs to start dealing with them. And I have to admit that it's a great try to kill two birds with one stone through the CHIPS and Science Act. That's why Biden himself has blamed inflation on chip shortages.
Let's look at the reason for the inflation. The reason for the inflation is the supply chains were cut off, meaning that the products, for example, automobiles, the lack of computer chips to be able to build those automobiles so they could function, they need those computer chips. They were not available.
U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer and other politicians lobbying for the act have also placed great hopes on this legislation.
The legislation is going to create good-paying jobs. It'll alleviate supply chains. It will help lower costs, and it will protect America's national security interests.
That's why, unlike gun reform and abortion policies, the CHIPS and Science Act is one of those rare legislative cases that gained bipartisan support. With its huge spending on the chip industry, Biden called it a once-in-a-generation investment in America itself. Spending more than $52 billion will hopefully help America regain its lead in semiconductor manufacturing. As Senator Schumer mentioned, the bill is also aimed at several other aspects, including lowering the cost of goods and mitigating domestic inflation, creating more jobs and making the U.S. less reliant on foreign manufacturing, alleviating supply chain disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, and also countering China's economic growth. So how is the U.S. government going to achieve all these objectives? It could come down to two areas: enhancing domestic chip manufacturing and attracting more overseas companies to build factories on American soil. As a matter of fact, there are different types of companies in semiconductor industry. Some companies specialize in contract manufacturing, such as TSMC and Micron Technology, and some are independent design companies, such as Qualcomm and Broadcom. There are also enterprises with complete design and production sections, such as Intel and Texas Instruments. Specifically, domestic invention offshore manufacturing is a common model in the U.S. semiconductor industry, which allows it to retain high value-added design sections domestically and outsource manufacturing to foreign countries. On the same day that U.S. President Joe Biden signed the CHIPS Act into law, Micron announced that it will invest $40 billion in memory chip manufacturing with the help of this legislation. Its investment will create up to 40,000 jobs in the U.S., including 5,000 highly paid roles inside Micron. Qualcomm, on the other hand, the leading fabless manufacturer, announced its purchase of an additional $4.2 billion worth of chips from GlobalFoundries' New York factory. The smartphone chip giant also plans to increase its U.S. production by 50% over the next 5 years. So it seems that the CHIPS Act will, to some extent, revitalize domestic chip manufacturing in the U.S. When it comes to attracting companies to set up new local factories, the scenario becomes somewhat complex. The White House statement on the act said one of its objectives is to counter China. The CHIPS Act is a major Democratic achievement, and the U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi was also a major promoter of the bill, and she makes no secret of the bill's exclusion of other countries, especially China.
Crucially, the bill contains strong guardrails.
The section-by-section summary of the CHIPS Act of 2022 clearly states how it will exclude China. The legislation forces companies to take sides, and if a company builds advanced manufacturing capacity in China, it will risk losing the federal funding available. We know that semiconductors are the brains of modern electronics. 5G communications, smart transportation, healthcare, and consumer electronics all depend on chips. But there is another crucial aspect regarding this particular industry. Chips are the product of a global production chain.
It's very, very difficult to completely disaggregate. These supply chains are very tightly interlinked, not just in semiconductors, but everything upstream and downstream that happens. It's very difficult to completely carve off sort of like the Western side from China. They don't really exist very well apart.
Maybe semiconductors are a bit abstract. Why don't we talk about something physically bigger? For example, computers. This is what Dell and Lenovo's supply chain network looks like. Either way, we're seeing a massive interconnected network that deeply involves a raft of companies in different regions and countries. So the supply chain problem won't be easily solved by simply shutting out some countries. On the contrary, blocking certain countries' participation may risk the safety of global supply chain, curb world trade, and increase prices for consumers. One of the overseas companies that the U.S. favors for building factories on its soil is TSMC, the world's largest chip maker, a multinational semiconductor manufacturing company in China's Taiwan region. In late July, Nancy Pelosi was deeply involved in a scandal related to her husband's timely stock purchasing. Paul Pelosi bought between $1 million and $5 million worth of shares in NVIDIA, a leading computer chip company, just weeks before Biden signed the CHIPS Act into law. Many people accused him of accessing insider information and cashing in on his wife's job, which the House Speaker has denied.
Over the course of your career, has your husband ever made a stock purchase or sale based on information he's received from you?
What are you saying?
Over the course of your career, has your husband ever made a stock purchase or sale based on information he received from you?
No, absolutely not.
Yet, she certainly is one of TSMC's top fans. During her controversial visit to the island of Taiwan in August, which was blasted as blatant provocation against China, she and the TSMC chairman met during a photo op. According to a media report, Pelosi discussed the upcoming CHIPS Act with TSMC chairman Liu De-in during their meeting, as well as the company's plan for the $12 billion chip factory in the U.S. state of Arizona. In the era of globalization, the creation of production and supply chains is based on total market rules and independent corporate decisions. But building a chip manufacturing site in the U.S. is not cost-effective at all. In 1997, TSMC set up a factory in the northwestern U.S. state of Oregon. According to Morris Chang, who founded TSMC, the world's most valuable semiconductor manufacturer, the company had no intentions to expand its Oregon plant in the past 25 years, as the large cost difference between manufacturing Taiwan and Oregon remains unchanged.
The same product, the Oregon cost is about 50% more than the Taiwan cost.
Ms. Chen said in a podcast interview that the U.S. is in fact in a very good position in semiconductor technology, and it has the most design capability in the world, and in fact, the best design capability. Yet increasing onshore chip manufacturing capacity will be an entirely different story. Semiconductors is one of the most cash-burning industries. A company like Intel is talking about an investment up to $100 billion in Ohio chip plants, and how much it could receive in the subsidies from the $52 billion federal funding remains unclear. That's why Mr. Chen concluded that raising America's domestic chip-making capacity will be extremely costly, with their eventual products not even competitive in the world market.
the effort to increase onshore manufacturing of semiconductors is a wasteful and expensive exercise in futility.
So maybe the CHIPS Act will help to open more factories and create more jobs in the US and make the country a bit less reliant on foreign manufacturing in the long run. But it seems it will not effectively lower the cost of goods and certainly has nothing to do with mitigating domestic inflation anytime soon. At the expense of undermining free market economies and global supply chains, the CHIPS and Science Act is more of a symbolic gesture to raise Biden's sagging poll numbers and burnish Pelosi's political legacy. Rather than having any actual impact on solving the problem it is evidently aimed at. So we kind of know for sure that this is another case of politics directing technology and will only be harmful to the global supply chain and future innovations in the semiconductor industry. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe to our shows if you like. I'm Sina. I'll see you guys next time.